This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. Very excited to be speaking with Eric Kripke about The Boys. How are you, Eric?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm a fan of this show, but I will admit I was behind. So when I found out I was going to talk to you, I watched the entire season in a very short period of time, which I usually don't do.
Oh,
And I'm still
wow.
processing a lot from that. So I hopefully we can talk for about 10 hours, but we'll make it work in 15 minutes today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, by the way, I have questions. Like I've never talked to anyone who's just watched it all in one jump. So curious
Well,
how it works as like a continuous piece.
I still can't do that. I still like other shows I was catching up on, so I'd watch one episode, then something else, then come back. So I didn't do like two in a row because I want them to feel distinct.
Yeah.
But it's a lot. I don't feel great about myself or hope for the world, anything like that. But
Well, then mission
there's
accomplished. No, no, no.
there's a lot to unpack, and I want to flag a severe spoiler warning for anyone watching here. Please watch season 4 before you keep watching here.
Hmm.
I'm not someone who's read the comics. Do you feel like you're really sticking to a lot of what's happening there, or you're starting there and, taking some liberties?
We've never really been particularly faithful to the comics with Garth Ennis's approval, like the creator, and he's a genius and my all-time favorite comic book writer. So it's something that I genuinely love. Like I have incredible devotion towards that comic. But from the jump, we couldn't because the comic is very episodic. If you read it, it's like there's no story that goes beyond a couple issues. And the business of streaming, certainly in 2017, 2018, when we first made the show, the business of streaming was you needed to tell one continuous story. So there simply wasn't a story in the books that could sustain, 8 1-hour episodes. Um, so from the beginning, the way I always put it is we the writers generally create their own season wide structure, like our spine. And then once we have it, we hang as much of the moments from the comics that we love on it as possible, and that's the clay or the flesh that we put on it. Um, so it's a bit of it's a bit of like a curated remix of the stuff we love from the comic, but kind of taken apart and put back together and put up in a different way. But so hopefully people who love the comic and watch the show feel that they're kindred siblings in terms of like having the same spirit and sensibility, even if the stories are quite different.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, there are definitely a lot of shock value moments. The only one that started to make me queasy was the lobotomy, which I think is probably among the tamer things that this show has done. But there are some, that are genuinely shocking and horrifying, and some that are more just weird and like oddly entertaining in a please look away kind of thing. Is there some sort of boundary, like where you say, like, this is too far, or the aim is if we're not getting there, we're not doing a good enough job?
No, we don't. I mean, as hard as this might be to believe, we genuinely do not spend time thinking about how we can be crazy. We um, really talk 75% of the time about just the characters and who they are and what their moments are. And then only then at the very end do we say like, all right, well, what would happen if a superhero was really in that moment or really had that power, right? And like not in the idealized world of, the MCU or the DCU, but in the real world, like if you had that power, how would you abuse it? You're just a person with your own idiosyncrasies. Like, so what weird shit would you do? Um, and then we let it sort of naturally come from that. So if it's not grounded in, I guess to answer your question, the restrictions we put on ourselves is if it's not grounded in character or story, the way I tell the writers, like if because everyone goes up to produce their own episodes, I said you have to stand on set and explain to the actor why this is important to their character to do. So make sure you have that. And it's not just, well, because it's crazy, because that's not fair to that actor trying to build that character.
Well, I'm thinking particularly of the Splinter, sauna sex scene that I'm sure was a VFX challenge.
It was, and and again, it came from, if you could clone yourself and you were really, really lonely, like what would you potentially do? And you know, who wouldn't clone 8 of themselves to have a human centipede in a sauna? Who wouldn't?
Well, I think this show definitely has a lot of violence, but next up is sex, and there's definitely, there's not a single character I think who's not pretty horny and doesn't get to indulge that in some way on this show.
Well, again, it's we're trying to reflect accurate humanity, and sex is a part of life, and it's a big part of our culture. And we always say, like, we're a funhouse mirror, sort of reflecting society back at itself. And uh, you know, from sex scandals to their own characters, it's just fertile storytelling ground.
I think in terms of reflecting reality, it was clear to some viewers like myself from previous seasons, who a lot of these, the members of the seven other people were meant to mirror in society. And it seems that, you know, some fans are not happy to have discovered that this season. Do you feel like things were being written to, are you reflecting reality more now than you were before? It's just becoming more obvious. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the show has sort of always been the show. We've always been, trying to reflect reality. I mean, look, we're a work of fiction. We have superheroes and people flying around and shooting lasers. Um, but right now in our world, there happens to be a trend of like a sort of a new cloak for authoritarianism, which is celebrity and social media and powered by billionaires. And it's entertaining and it's fun and shocking. Um, and that happens just to be the world we're in. And that also happens to be 100% what a fascist superhero would do, who is both all powerful and the world's biggest celebrity, right? And so that one-to-one lineup um, means that that's just reality. Look, I've never been shy about my own personal politics. For the record, I think every season there's like a flush of articles of people are now discovering what The Boys is about. I think it comes like cicadas, like you can always count on 5 of those articles every time. Um, but people are going to get what they're going to get out of it. We're just trying to ask questions, and we take great pride in for a for a superhero show. We take great pride in being one of the most current shows on television, and that's no small feat when you got people flying around in capes.
And I guess we should be grateful that, at least to our knowledge, the government is not working on developing Compound V because in our real life that would be pretty bad.
To your knowledge is doing a lot of lifting in that sentence.
Well, I do. I was very impressed with the main two character additions in this season to the seven. Well, I guess there's three for the actor playing Noir, who is very entertaining and absurd. But I think Sister Sage and Firecracker are both so drastically different in terms of Firecracker being the conspiracy theorist who really, really believes what she's saying, but also is, highly problematic. Whereas Sister Sage just is smart enough to know that having convictions and all that doesn't matter because if you're the smartest person in the world, you just have to accomplish what you want. Can you talk about crafting those two characters?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was the conversation began with um, what's missing from the seven, what do we need? What would be interesting to counterbalance against the existing characters? And this notion, and what also just from the almost like what superpower haven't we, approached yet? And I think that's where Sage came from because there's this trope in the superhero world of like the world's smartest person. And and again, our North Star is always like, what would you do for real if you were the world's smartest person? Not, this idealized solve humanity's problems. That is just not what you would do. You would be miserable. You would be the most miserable person on earth, and the saddest because you just know that whatever you do to try to help, like, just won't work. No one will go for it and no one will believe you. And then, the added notion of she's a black woman. And so no one's going to particularly listen to her. And the frustration of that, I think is just a really fascinating character study. Um, and then Firecracker sort of came from this notion of what was the fringiest fringe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, is now the mainstream. And she's sort of, I think she's inspired by a lot of people, but I think she's inspired most by like the QAnon phenomenon and just like how something that outlandish can be considered mainstream in and enter completely, you know, public conversations in a really, when that's wild to me. Um, and so she sort of reflects that. And then once you bring those two characters in, and then you realize they're going to be bouncing off each other, um, it also sort of you sort of land on Sage is all head and Firecracker's all heart. And Sage has an amazing IQ, but Firecracker's got a pretty amazing EQ. So once it became a duel between those two, it was interesting to see how they both sort of cozy up to Homelander and how they play him in very different ways. Um, so that became sort of an interesting character study as well.
Absolutely. And I think the show has no shortage of memorable deaths, but I am curious about the calculus of when do you kill someone off? Because, for instance, Newman, who has killed many people in a very memorable way, that was a pretty surprising loss for me, just because, especially at the moment of like, she may be completely switching sides, and then it's like, nope, we're done with her. How did that decision come about?
Um, we'd known for a very long time that Newman wasn't gonna make it out of season four, and that you know the look, anyone who gets close to Homelander, sooner or later, like the leopard eats their face. Like if you're gonna hang out with a leopard, like don't be mad that it eats your face. That's what leopards do. And so it was gonna be inevitable. And it was sort of time, because her main role, from a plot perspective, was to get him into the White House one way or another. And then once she did, she didn't, that character wouldn't have had the same narrative drive in season five anyway. And it was sort of time to go. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like she finally broke good, that's about how, to me, that's about like Butcher's decision, which is, in our show again and again, making like the macho, action movie decision is usually the wrong decision. And had he come into it just a little more sensitive and open, they probably all would have saved the world right then and there. But he comes in with like the cool catchphrase and the tough Eastwood thing, and then proceeds to pull the trigger that causes this disaster. Um, so it's like sort of an ongoing criticism of toxic masculinity.
We are just about out of time, but there's one season left. I'm feeling pretty depressed about the state of these characters, even at the end of season four. Is there any reason to hope, or it's going to be a miserable, brutal
There's
slog to the finish?
there's reason for hope. In many ways, season five is about hope and how do you hold on to hope in the face of overwhelming odds, and what's a realistic way that you can keep making the world a better place. So there's quite a lot of hope and talking about hope in season 5. So no, it is not going to be it's not going to be a death trip. These characters deserve a happy ending.
I like to hear that, and that will help me continue to process these pretty intense
Well, if you
eight
need
episodes.
therapy, I will not be paying that bill. But
I would not expect. Thank you so much, Eric. This was a pleasure.
yeah, thank you, man. That was fun.